Welcome to the DeFi Podcast, where we discuss all things DeFi. We host in-depth discussions with industry leaders with a focus on the Avalanche ecosystem. The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. Statements made by hosts or guests reflect their own beliefs and opinions and is not investment advice. The hosts or guests may have personal investments in any assets being discussed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the DeFi Podcast, where we discuss any and all things crypto. Your usual host, JF, has now been in Buenos Aires for about a week, but he is bouncing from one Airbnb to another. Did you say you're at a palace now? What's going on?
We're talking about our personal. Are you doxing my location right now?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, it took the fourth Airbnb to find a good one, but now living in a palace. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. We're going to come visit when we go to Argentina. So he's, like I said last week, he's at the advanced party scouting the area for us. So I'm going to take over hosting duties again just for today. Next week, we will hopefully do a podcast all together at Argentina, which should be really fun. JF is a longtime Web3 builder and currently the head of DeFi at Gogo Pool, a liquid staking platform on Avalanche. Next, we have Jared. Jared, again, is a true crypto OG. He started mining Bitcoin blocks over a decade ago, although he doesn't do that anymore. And he has been involved in the crypto space ever since. Jared, how are you doing? When are you going to Argentina?
Getting there 2 days before Summit starts. And I am not Satoshi, just in case you were wondering.
Yeah. We're not going to change the outcome of the U.S. elections on this podcast? Okay, good. All right. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, next we have Rhett. Rhett is the founder of both Gravita and Avant, which is a new protocol that aims to create the best yield-bearing stable value token that you can find on any chain. Rhett, how are you doing?
Doing great. I'm also not Satoshi.
Did you say that you have a 40-hour trip to get to Argentina?
Yeah, I have like almost a day layover in Panama.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it. So 40 hours. He's taking 40 hours to get there, so no one has an excuse that they can't come because it's too long. 40 hours. Oh, damn.
40 hours is brutal. I'm looking at a 20-hour trip to get there, and I'm dreading it.
12 hours doesn't seem so bad. All right, there we go. I'm Bill. I'm a former TradFi guy who fell down the crypto rabbit hole in 2019, and now I run a firm called Daybreak Digital that invests in crypto. Okay, so first, let's discuss probably the most exciting news that happened this week, at least in the Avalanche community, which is the release of this awesome new game called Off the Grid. Off the Grid is a new AAA game that's built using Avalanche, and it's just been released for everybody. I think it's been in open beta for a little while. It's like a battle royale / extraction third-person shooter. But the thing that's really cool to me is that it's set in this really cool dystopian future. And for anyone that's listening, if you haven't seen the trailers for it, even if you're not going to play the game and you're not interested in that, you should definitely go to YouTube and check out the trailer because the cinematics for the game are absolutely incredible. You know, like most blockchain games and cinematics, if they have any, are honestly like they're so terrible, like it's embarrassing to watch sometimes. But Off the Grid is really an exception. It's really, really good. It's the best cinematics and the best gameplay as well that I've seen for any blockchain game by far, ever. It's really good. And it's no surprise because if you look at the team that's building it, the creative director of the game is a guy named, I'm going to butcher it, but Neil Blomkamp. And he is the director of a movie called District 9, which you guys might remember. He also did a couple other movies too, like Elysium and Chappie, which is kind of, he does a lot of this intersection between humans and robots. And it seems like he's kind of bringing the same vision to Off the Grid because in that game, players volunteer to have their arms and legs chopped off and then replaced with like these robotic arms and legs. And they like give them like superhuman powers basically, or they're really awesome weapons. And in my opinion, like this vision for the game is, you know, for the blockchain component is actually really, really important because in order for any game to be successful, like the lore has to be really good. And in this game, like it's starting off really strong. It's very good. And then the blockchain part of the game, like the actual gameplay doesn't touch the chain at all, but there's supposed to be a marketplace. I haven't tried it myself, but there's supposed to be a marketplace where you can go trade your arms and your legs and get upgrades and better weapons and armor and et cetera. And people are not going to really engage in that unless they care about the game, right? So to me, it was just really interesting to see first like a game it looks really fun. It looks, like the gameplay is actually like there's a high skill cap, and like it makes it so that people care about the game. Have you guys seen the clips of the game? What do you guys think so far?
I actually have not seen it yet. I'm excited to look. Before this, the game that looked like highest quality that I have followed a little bit is Illuvium. Illuvium has this huge. I'm at Permissionless right now, and they have this huge like booth, and you can go play the game and try it out. And that one looked really good. But I actually haven't seen this one yet. I'm interested. I actually, the thing I need to like learn more about, I feel like, is that blockchain intersection, because the main thing that's held me up with crypto games in the past is I have a very annoying setup for transacting on the blockchain. Like I have, hardware wallets, and I have like a crypto only laptop that I don't take with me. And I don't want it to touch things other than very specific DeFi protocols. Anyway, so I've just been kind of like, if I need to connect my wallet to this thing and then connect that to my socials. So I've always just been like, how do I engage with these on a computer that I care less about? But it sounds like I could just play the game and maybe, worry about that piece later, play it on my normal computer. So that seems interesting. And that might be true with the others too. I just haven't tried them really, and I ought to. But as a crypto person, that's been my main pain point that I feel like maybe this solves.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like, I think many people who are playing the game, they don't even really know or care that it's a blockchain game, right? You can play it on PS5, on Xbox, on a PC. I don't think you need any kind of Web3 component. Like, you don't need to touch or do anything Web3 at all to play the game. It's just an awesome freaking game. That's just what it is, which is, in my opinion, like what you need, right? You just need an awesome economy or game that people care about. And then once they start doing transactions, like, how do you support that? This is the part where, to me, the Avalanche piece seems really interesting, because they do have an Avalanche subnet now, L1. They have an Avalanche L1. It has 10 validators. It's been running for a while. I went to the Block Explorer and I couldn't really see what transactions were happening. Maybe I didn't look at the right place. But that thing is basically isolated traffic away from the C chain. Like, activity happening on other chains doesn't really matter. It can all be self-contained there. The finality is going to be fast. Hopefully the throughput is high enough to support the game. Like, in my opinion, just the Avalanche team has to make sure that this goes really smooth for the game. Like, if it does actually experience a huge volume of transactions, that the blockchain performs well. So it's just something that I'm kind of keeping an eye on, and I hope it works out really well. One thing that was kind of interesting is Avalanche partnered with a couple like famous streamers to bring a lot of attention to the game. And I think they probably had to pay for those partnerships. That's cool. I mean, whatever brings a lot of eyes to off the grid, that's great. I think that's how most games do it. But the thing that was interesting to me is you could also see that there were 2,000 other people who were streaming the game, who were just random people who were just enjoying the game. So it does seem like there's this groundswell of support for it. It should be pretty fun to watch. I'm also tempering expectations a bit, because creating a game that people love and play for a long time is very difficult. Yeah, it's very hard, right? Like, what was the one that was really popular? Like, I just saw it on TikTok basically earlier in the year. Helldivers 2, right? It was like really popular earlier in the year, and then some developer made an update to the game, and like everyone was like, the game sucks now. I don't even know why, what happened with it, but like creating a game that has staying power is kind of difficult. Which actually, if I can introduce one aside on gaming before we move to something else, is I saw an interesting announcement about a team that's building a modded World of Warcraft server, but making all of the transactions that happen in the game. So it's like it's definitely not officially supported by Blizzard. It's like some modded version of it you apply to get in the beta. I would love to check that out, because I have not played any video games basically since I quit World of Warcraft during Wrath of the Lich King. Like, that's really the last time I played video games.
Oh, our experiences are very similar in that regard.
Oh, what did you play? What did you play? What was your main?
All right, yeah. I played a warrior for way too long, way too many years of my life spent on that game.
Myself too, yeah. My friends suckered me into we got back from a deployment in the Marine Corps, and my friends were like, let's all stay in touch by playing World of Warcraft, and they suckered me into being a tank. Mm-hmm. And so for like 2 years of my life, I spent being a tank. It was such a mistake, but anyway.
That's awesome. Yeah. I've made some of my closest friends by playing video games over the years, and World of Warcraft wasn't mine, but it was StarCraft for a while. And then I had friends trying to attract me to other games, and I'm like, I'm a video game monogamist. I only play StarCraft. But then all my friends left, and
A video game monogamist. That's the first time I've heard that.
I think I made it up, but I was like, I only play StarCraft. But then all my friends stopped playing. Most of my friends stopped playing StarCraft, and I realized it was the staying in touch with friends that I care about more. So then I kind of migrated to a few other games over the years. Haven't played much in a while, but by the way, one other couple of quick thoughts on crypto games specifically. For those who followed this during the last cycle, that was in 2021. One of like the hottest areas was crypto gaming, and like there's a few of them, Axie Infinity, and then some Axie Infinity kind of spin-offs that went insanely high valuation for a short period of time. There was like mania over it, and then it crashed harder than the rest of the market, like so severe. I know someone personally who put $30,000 into, it was kind of an Axie Infinity clone where you have these NFTs and then you can like breed them and make more, and then you earn in-game currency. And then you basically let other people use your NFTs. And so this person had like 1,000 people, mostly in the Philippines, that would like borrow their NFTs and use them in the game to earn this currency. And this friend of mine was like, oh, I'm employing like 1,000 people and they're earning like more than a typical salary in the Philippines by just playing this game for a couple hours a day. And it was like super exciting. That $30,000 went to like 5 million. But the problem with those games is that they're not fun. And the only people who are playing them are people who are playing them to like make a living. And they're people who, so then they play the game, they earn the in-game currency and then dump it.
Yeah, they treat it as a job.
Yeah, it's not fun. There's no monetary inflows. It's only sell pressure. And that game nuked so hard. It went from 30K to like 5 mil to zero. And it went to zero like in like a couple of days. We're talking like Terra Luna speed. There was no like death spiral mechanic. It's just like there was so much sell pressure from people playing this game that once the speculation ended and people just saw it was dumping, everyone exited. And so, like my thought for a while has been, there's a couple of things you have to have for a crypto game to work. Number one, it has to be fun to play. You need people to come play it for reasons other than financial gain. And you need some group of people who are even willing to pay money into the game to play it. Like if you don't have financial inflows, you can't create some economy that like where the value of the stuff all goes up. So some of these newer games, this one you're talking about, and then Illuvium and some of these others that actually look fun to play. And there's probably going to be some large group of people who will play the game to have fun, and will maybe even spend $10 a month buying a skin for their characters or whatever. That's sustainable, and there's some value add by having some blockchain stuff. But if you're just trying to create some thing where, it becomes a job and the game's not fun and all that stuff, I think those will never work. And we saw that in a really big way. So Axie and those others. Now, maybe those games get fun. I don't know what's going on with Axie Infinity. Maybe they've been working behind the scenes to actually create some fun mechanics. But I think that's what I watch for. Like, if I was going to invest in a game and like if they have a native token, buy a native token or whatever, those are the things I would look at is number one, is it fun? Number two, are people going to be willing to pay to play the game? At least some cohort.
I think your secondary criteria there is potentially a factor of your first criteria, right? If the game is not fun, people are not going to spend their money to actually continue playing it. If they only see it as a means to an end, just to, get some yield or make some money, they're also not going to put money into it. It's going to be purely an extractive process. But yeah, like making a game fun, especially like crypto games, is exceedingly rare. And I imagine it's also exceedingly difficult because you have to overcome the big challenges of working in like the experience of using MetaMask to trying to make your game fun. And that is not easy because using MetaMask is not very fun. So yeah, but one of the earlier crypto games that I was really impressed with, and I'm sort of disappointed that it never really continued, it was called Rarity. It was made by Andre, how's his last name pronounced?
Cronje.
Yeah, it was a really like interesting and kind of very simple mechanic. It was like kind of like an on-chain D&D. You could make yourself a little character. Your character is represented by an NFT. You can take your NFT and go do little battles, and you're paying little bits of gas every time you do this. It was a really interesting concept, and I haven't seen a lot of concepts like it. I would like to see more of them like it. It was fun and it was purely on chain. Yeah. So before we move on, I guess at this point, I'm just going to accept and grow into my title as Permabear. I'd like to understand what exactly we are meaning when we use the term blockchain game. It's because now I'm not going to bash Off the Grid whatsoever because it looks like a fun game. It looks like a very well-made AAA game. The gaming part of it, I have no issues with. I might actually be interested in playing it at some point. However, the blockchain part of it doesn't really impact the gameplay in any way. Your experience of actively playing the game doesn't really intersect with using a blockchain at any point. And I think something like tracking the items and drops on a blockchain is an interesting method for trying to do that. I mean, we've seen systems like Steam, right? Steam has a perfectly valid, working, easy to use item and drop system where you can transfer items between users. They have a marketplace. You can go and trade your items. And they don't have a blockchain. It's just run on their centralized system. So I'm kind of curious what the specific benefit, because I think there can be real benefits of moving a system onto a blockchain. I just wonder what it could potentially be in this case. Or if it's just kind of like, we just want to do this because we like it and we want to support the tech. If that's the reason, I have no issue with it. I still think it's very interesting. I just have criticisms about, like, we need to make sure that the usability of blockchains is not just becoming a vanity metric, because we see a lot of vanity metrics in crypto. And if you don't need to use a blockchain for a system for something you're building, I don't think you necessarily should.
Oh, it seems to me that we're going to be bringing on like a lot of Web2 businesses to the blockchain, right? So that's the way I think about some of these games. I guess when it comes to gaming, there's like in my mind two main categories. There's like the gambling game that Brett sort of alluded to a little bit earlier. That is sort of a boring game, pretty on chain though, right? Because it is like sort of like trading with other people. It's almost more like a DeFi type of game, but not really like a good game in the way that we think of or that people want to play. And that seems to be maybe something that's not going to win as hard in terms of gaining users. I think that season probably has come and gone. The game that we're discussing now is more in the second category where it's an off-chain game. And then there are some game assets that you can trade essentially like via DEX, right? So it's an off-chain game with a DEX, right? Is that something you guys would agree with?
Somewhat. I think that's fair.
I guess if we agree on that, I mean, to me, it's interesting in the sense that we are bringing, I mean, blockchain tech is like permeating through society and through Web2 applications, which is nice. I think you want for blockchain tech to win in important sort of verticals like money or voting. It's also nice if it's winning in a bunch of other areas, which are perhaps like less valuable per se, but it's just getting this tech everywhere that it can go. I think it's going to help us make everything come together.
So I think it's a good thing that a blockchain game doesn't do most of the game actions on chain. A blockchain is a really good ledger of ownership. And so if I'm designing a blockchain game, I really only want it to touch like ownership of in-game assets. And then in the early stages, I think the benefit is this is probably just an easier way to account for ownership and then allow users to just kind of, I can send you my skin if I want. Long term, being able to plug these things into DeFi gets interesting, and you don't have to build that yourself. Where if there's an in-game currency and in-game skins, etc., and you say, hey, I'll just hand off the ownership over there. And then, if some DeFi platform wanted to integrate those assets and allow people to do other interesting things as the game matures, great. And I don't have to build any of that. But I think it's probably in most cases a bad idea to do any of the in-game actions as like touching the blockchain at all.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you tried to run like a state machine off of a blockchain, I think you'd have a really slow game.
Yeah, just being cynical for a second, like Axie Infinity's FDV, I think it got up to like 10 billion, right? Like Off the Grid is a much better game than Axie Infinity was. Imagine what the FDV could get to we have another 2021 style run, right? So it could be just a cynical point of view, like it could be a way for them to just try to cash in. I mean, that's possible. I think a more appropriate way to look at it, though, is like, look, the whole game is about like modularity of arms and legs and weapons. And like, I mean, the people have been telling the story about blockchain all the time. Like, you can take your sword from one game to another. Like, maybe they're actually trying to do something like that, where, this guy, Neil Blomkamp seems like a world builder. Like, so he's creating all this lore and stuff. And who knows what the next game he does, like, somehow also connects into the same chain, and you can move stuff between his game that he created to something else. Like, we have no idea what these guys have planned. But so far it looks really, really good. I'm kind of tempted to go buy a PS5 or a PC or whatever I need to play the game. I haven't played games in over a decade, and it's the first time I've really been tempted. Okay.
Before we move to Avalanche 9000, which I think we want to do next, I just want to say, yeah, so besides trading game assets, I think you just raised an important point, Bill. It's the FDV of the project, right? So you're potentially, just think about a Web2 project or just any company and just tokenizing the shares of that company and bring that on chain, right? If that's the only thing that gaming sort of ends up doing, that's huge. Like, if you can bring all game assets and tokenize all the value of all those companies, and instead of trading in public markets that are centralized, you have that on the blockchain, that is amazing. That's the beginning of stock market 2.0.
Yeah, good point. Maybe some of the value starts accruing to the actual customers or users, right? Yeah, that could be really cool. And we're going to keep an eye on it. It was a fun week, definitely, to watch all this stuff. Let's transition now to Argentina and Avalanche 9000. And I'm going to pass it over to JF because he's already there and knows a lot about Avalanche 9000. So go ahead, JF.
So Avalanche, since its inception, has been generally around the top 10, generally between 5 to 10 in terms of TVL compared to all the other chains. So obviously, if you're in DeFi, you can go to DeFi Llama and check that out and monitor that. I think the sentiment on Avalanche is that is not a good result. That we should be in the top 5. And I'm actually quite impressed with this result because we haven't seen the heyday of Avalanche yet. The tech hasn't been ready. To me, the thesis of Avalanche is this AppChain thesis. The right example to look at currently as a chain that has been able to be successful in this area is Cosmos. Cosmos is a very good model, but there's some drawback. I personally see it as a little bit like of how to run an app chain. And Avalanche 9000, I believe, is going to be essentially the V2. So Avalanche 9000 is going to be the combination of Avalanche finally shipping the messaging system. So AWM /dev/, there's other acronyms for it, but all of that tech essentially being final, plus the new economic model for the way validation on each subnet, which are now called L1s, how that's going to run. Once these two last pieces come together, I think you're going to have a chain that is going to be the logical place to launch any L1. So just a couple of advantages that Avalanche is going to have over Cosmos, which it doesn't now, right? Because it's not finished. So it maybe has these advantages, but it's not a sort of usable or a perfectly usable product. And I think it will be in a few months. So number one, on Avalanche, you are able to have essentially an unlimited validator set. The Tendermint consensus doesn't really scale. So you're sort of blocked at like 200 validators on Cosmos. So you can only decentralize so far. The Cosmos is not an EVM chain, so you can't use your favorite wallet like Rabi or MetaMask. There's essentially no value that accrues to add. That's very decentralized. At the same time, it means that there's no sort of centralized group that can help on building this tech further, or that necessarily has like incentive to build the tech further or to do BD for the chain. So I would see that as a weak point. That could be, I think, a place where there could be like a logical debate, but I would personally see that as negative. And then I think launching an L1 on Avalanche is also going to be just cheaper and faster, and just it's going to be easier to experiment. I'm incredibly bullish on that happening. I'm also curious to see which L1s are going to launch and how that economy is going to play out. And I don't think we know yet, but the AppChain thesis, which I think we've seen some version of it with Cosmos, I think it's going to see its heyday. It's going to see its heyday on Avalanche, and it's only going to see its heyday on Avalanche after Avalanche 9000, which is the team for Summit, which is something we will start covering next week as we film from Argentina.
Do we know when the upgrade is actually supposed to go live and what the main features of it are? Is this ACP 77 basically going live with subnet only validators? Is that the main thrust of it?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's essentially ACP 77 plus the messaging system being worked out. So those two are like the major pieces that go live together.
There's actually a number of Avalanche improvement proposals that are going live all at the same time with Avalanche 9000, like, which is part of I imagine, which is like the reason why they called it Avalanche 9000, because there's like 9,000 changes coming to the blockchain. It's the largest single upgrade that Avalanche has experienced since it launched, you know.
Yeah. Just to be clear, I'm just naming the two, I think, major factors that to me are the big missing pieces to having this thesis come forward.
Yeah, the two main factors that are going to happen, like you said, is the ACP 77 piece, which decouples validating the main chain from L1s, and then Avalanche warp messaging is going to be another huge part of that. I think warp messaging is going to be really interesting. From the little bit that I do know about it, it seems like they've built it in a very nice way. So I'm curious to see how people start trying to, warp messaging into like, DeFi contracts, for example. That remains to be seen, but yeah, kind of can't wait to see what actually happens. On the topic of like how many chains are actually going to launch. So we did a previous podcast with Eric from Avalabs, and he did mention, I imagine publicly, that they're going to be waiving the P-chain fee for validators for a period of time until they get to a certain arbitrary, very high number of total validators registered to the P-chain. So until that point, essentially, the cost of launching a blockchain is like probably the subscription cost of ChatGPT, essentially, because there's going to be all of these pre-configured methods of launching them. We've seen previously, like even before ACP 77, the Avalabs devs were talking about how you can launch a subnet in like 15 seconds. You just type in a couple of things, you install the required software on a VM, whatever, and away you go. Your blockchain is live.
Does that mean that we're going to see a Jared chain, proof of work Jared chain?
You know what? It could very well happen. But I think, like, for sure, one of the things that's going to happen is this idea of L1 season, where we see a ridiculous number of brand new L1s launching, and it will be very hard to discern the valuable ones from the not so valuable ones, because, I mean, why not, right? If it's essentially almost free, other than the cost of development and hosting for, your nodes, everyone's going to want to launch an L1.
Yeah, dude, it's really interesting, right? Because I think today was the announcement that Uniswap was going to create their own chain called, what is it called? Unichain or something like that. And I think they said that they're going to build on Optimism Stack, right? So it's like, what is it going to look like in the future? For example, let's say Uniswap continues to dominate most flows. Is it going to be the case that Uniswap or some version of Uniswap exists on every chain, and then there's all this fragmented liquidity and there's really no like simplified user interface for somebody to be able to trade? Or is it going to be unit chains? So there's going to be one chain that you have to send your assets to, and then you can do all the trading there. Or is it going to be abstracted away even more than that, where like you just basically plug in the asset that you have and the asset you want to trade to, and then it like goes and looks at every chain and does it for like, how is this thing going to end up looking? And I do like the AppChain. I do buy into the AppChain thesis, because if you're creating enough value that like you're clogging up the chain that you're on, it makes sense to put your activity in kind of a fault tolerant separate location, as long as the communication with other chains is fine. What I'm curious about is like, why is it that Uniswap, like I would love to have been in the room when Hayden and whoever else at Uniswap was deciding which chain to go to, which tech stack to build on. Why did they choose Optimism as opposed to Cosmos or Avalanche or something else? Like that's the part that's really interesting to me. I would love to get some more insight into that. Maybe the upgrade for Avalanche makes it much more attractive to do so on Avalanche. That would be great.
I can't really speak to why they chose Optimism as opposed to another L2 stack or Avalanche or Cosmos, but a couple of the things that they have said is One of the things that Hayden mentioned about why they are going to have Unichain is if Ethereum is going to be a more expensive place to transact, which it will, and it's meant to be more of a settlement environment for the L2s that sit on top of it, it's not good for users to enter through L1 and then to bridge to the different L2s always through L1, because they're now always having to experience the L1 costs. They should be able to onboard straight to the L2. So that's one of the issues. Secondly, DEXs work better if you have better throughput and speed. MEV is more amplified if you have longer block times. And so one of the things that they've done to optimize the OP stack that they're developing on is, I think they're claiming they'll be able to get like 200 millisecond block times, which is really fast, and that will be a better DEX experience. My personal view, by the way, as far as like, will there be a Uniswap on every chain, or it will be a central Uniswap, or will it be something else? I think there's going to be kind of like, it's a little bit of both. So they obviously will have the Uniswap chain. It is general purpose, other people can build there, but it's optimized for the DEX and for DeFi specifically, since that's what they care about. They also will have their Uniswap instance elsewhere. But I think for DEX swaps long term, the user experience is going to move toward intents, where I'm on chain A and I have asset X, and I want to swap it for this other asset, and maybe I want the result to show up on chain B. I just say, this is what I have, this is what I want, and where I want it. And then that will get solved under the hood by solvers, et cetera, that fill that order that compete to fill that order. And they'll use the underlying AMMs and maybe other order books, et cetera, even DeFi platforms to fulfill the order for me. And to me, like, I don't have to care what DEX it swapped on, what chains it on, any of those things. For swappers, I think it's going to all move toward intents like that. And then you'll have solvers. And then like these AMMs are going to be competing to be the place where solvers route their traffic through.
Got it. Okay, so then it seems like the thing that's the most important then is performance, right? Because if you have a chain that can perform really, like if the block times are really slow, the uptime is very high, the throughput is high, et cetera, naturally then when you combine all that together, the activity should just flow to the chain that performs the best. Like basically the best chain should win.
This matters a lot, both uptime and block times. And like one of the common forms of MEV, they call it SEX-DEX arbitrage. So centralized exchanges like Binance is where kind of price discovery happens. And then people will arbitrage the difference between the price of ETH on Binance versus the price of ETH on Ethereum or Base or whatever. But if block times get really fast, like Mega ETH is claiming it'll have 1 millisecond block times. And if a lot of the liquidity comes there and it has good uptime, then if that becomes where price discovery happens, then there's interestingly flips that whole thing on its head and really benefits DeFi as a whole, as opposed to decentralized exchanges. So that element of performance, like fast block times and good uptime, for DEXs specifically, it does matter. It helps with MEV, and it also helps if you become the place where price discovery happens, and it's impacted by both liquidity and speed.
It would have been such a nice announcement before Avalanche Summit if Hayden had announced that he was moving to an Avalanche L1. Oh God, man, ACP 77 just coming a week too late. No, we can hope, right?
Maybe Trader Joe will do an Avalanche L1 or something.
Yeah. When we're at Argentina next week, maybe we'll have some more news on Avalanche 9000, or maybe the week after we'll do like a summary talking about all the announcements and stuff that happened. But okay, let's move on to the last topic for the day, which, if it's okay, Rhett, I'll hand it off to you. I know you're at Permissionless right now. You're seeing some interesting things over there. Maybe if you could just touch on one, maybe two things that you saw that you thought were kind of interesting, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. I spent quite a bit of time at this kind of side event called DEAI, Decentralized AI, just kind of looking at what was being built over there. And it's kind of interesting. So I think AI on the blockchain, there is a lot of like, I would call it like kind of worthless things being built in that space. It's, the sort of person who wants to kind of chase after buzzwords and narrative is going to naturally have an affinity for something like that. But there's also some really good things being built. And I see kind of a growing need. So I was chatting with some people at Render, which is kind of a DPIN network where you can kind of plug your GPU into the service, and then like an artist that needs to get something rendered, instead of doing it at home and taking a day to do it. They can pay to have the render network do it. They're going to start doing more with like AI inference as well, where you could hand them a job that you need processed. I don't think we're going to see a lot of AI training because compute is not super fungible, and like these big LLMs especially, it makes more sense, I think, to have, a bunch of H100s in a giant data center rather than having trying to have a bunch of individuals at home plugging their computers into the network. But the area that I see that's really interesting here, where there's not a lot of solutions yet, but the huge need, I don't know if you guys have followed Cursor, but it's this new kind of AI coding tool. It's an IDE, a development environment for programmers, and you can literally just ask it what you want. You're like, hey, I'm building this app, build this thing and this thing and this thing, and it will do a really good job. It'll get almost all the way there in a lot of cases. I was talking to a friend at the conference. He's a CTO at a Web2 software company, and he had an intern that was working for a week on a specific feature and wasn't quite done with it. And he was like, hey, he got on a call with that guy and said, hey, just as an exercise, let's start from scratch and see if we can use Cursor to do it. He had some tool where he could speak to his Mac, and he just spoke in natural language and said, okay, I want you to do this for me, and then this, and then this, and this. And Cursor basically built the whole feature for them within a half hour or something crazy. It's someone who knows how to use those tools, it's like a tenfold productivity amplifier, really crazy. And someone who's maybe not even that good of a developer could become one. Although I think really good developers probably know better how to ask it the questions. But one of the points that he made that I think is an interesting one is some companies, especially that are building more proprietary things, there's a fear because you're sending huge data packets back and forth between you and Cursor. And it's like, hey, what are they doing with that data? Are they going to take my IP that I'm building this thing? They're going to take it, et cetera. And so one of the things that I think is a really interesting opportunity for decentralized AI is if you have the inference for Cursor in a privacy-proof decentralized compute system where you don't have to be worried about your data being stolen or et cetera. I think there's something particularly interesting there. So there's some research that applies to blockchain privacy. So there's zero knowledge proofs that people are familiar with. There's this thing called homomorphic encryption, where if you can, implement that and drive down the cost of that, et cetera, you may be able to have something like Cursor where someone's able to get all those benefits, but it's in an encrypted environment where they're not worried about the data privacy. And then one other area that I think is interesting, so there's Eric Voorhees has a startup called Venice AI, and it's basically an LLM. You can go in and you can interact with it like ChatGPT, and you can have it generate images, et cetera. And the goal there is to A, not censor the response, and then B, not track and take your data. And I think it'll probably always be a little bit behind the OpenAIs of the world, et cetera, but I think there's a really good place for that. And as some of these privacy technologies improve, I think there's going to be some interesting things that they'll be able to upgrade Venice and other similar systems as well. So I actually think there is real stuff happening there that's interesting. It's not all hype. There's some really actually interesting things happening.
The decentralized component that you were talking about, so you were saying that, so I'm not that familiar with AI, but there's specialized hardware that obviously runs the LLMs much faster, right? But so from my point of view, once I send my request to an LLM anywhere, right, instead of computing it on local hardware, it can be read, right? So decentralized AI, right? How would they keep the data or somehow keep the network decentralized so that people don't know what it is that I'm using the LLM for if I have to send the query to one of these bulky machines to be able to do the whatever it is LLM work? How does that work?
Exactly. Yeah. So so that's that piece where being able to send and receive data in an encrypted manner is the key. So homomorphic encryption is the technology they think will kind of unlock that, where I could send my request and get the processing done and then get the response back in an encrypted way where those that I sent it to are unable to see it, not just promising to not share it, but actually unable to see it. So that's the key piece there. And then as far as AI, by the way, I personally think so. There's two kind of pieces of an LLM. There's the training and then there's the inference. Inference meaning you make a request and it gives you back something. Training is the development of the model itself. Training, not going to be decentralized anytime soon, I don't think. Inference is a little bit easier to decentralize, especially if you have good encryption. And the good encryption, You can do it without that, but the good encryption is just going to make it more trustworthy where, hey, maybe I don't want the company, I don't want OpenAI to know about these requests I'm sending it because I'm using it to develop some IP, et cetera. So yeah, it's that encryption piece that's the key. And I think the focus maybe forever, for at least a long time, will be on the inference side.
When you say encryption, that's encryption that allows computation to be performed on encrypted data without having to decrypt it, right? So that's how that works.
Yeah, exactly. So there's different like levels and types of encryption and like different types of like, for instance, zero knowledge proofs, et cetera. I'm actually not a technical expert on homomorphic encryption, but like my understanding is that is like the gold standard of like, if you can have a homomorphically encrypted kind of environment that you're sending data to and from, there's basically no way for them to see it, take your information, et cetera. But it's complex and ultra expensive, et cetera, to do homomorphic encryption. So there's like some development that needs to happen there still.
Speaking of AI, one thing that's going to be kind of interesting to view, I'm going to quick tangential AI thing, is that last year at the Avalanche Summit, so it's been almost a year and a half now, Gun, the founder of Avalanche, was talking about coin-operated agents, which I think maybe we've talked about before, which is essentially, it's kind of like a cursor, but for blockchain, Rhett. It's like where they were planning on creating a prototype where each of the validators was basically an LLM. And as a user, you could just type send 10 USDC to my friend Rhett, and it would just do it on the blockchain. And I guess the way they were building it was they were trying to make it so that you never had to write any Solidity code. Like basically there was no code. There's no smart contracts thing code at all. It's all just LLMs. So I'm going to be curious because last year when they had the summit, like artificial intelligence was really hot. So let's see if they just drop it, don't talk about it at all, or if there's some sort of meaningful update. It'd be kind of a cool surprise if they had like a prototype of it up and running. Because that would be kind of a different take on AI and blockchain that I think kind of makes sense, right? Like just trying to communicate to the blockchain what it is that you want to happen, even something pretty simple like deposit stuff on Aave on some chain. Like it's fairly, laborious for a developer to learn the smart contracting code, create it, audit it, launch it, etc. It can be like a nice little shortcut around something like that, which is the only thing in blockchain AI that I've seen that kind of makes sense.
To be like sort of self-critical of the ecosystem that we work in or that we're interested in, not that I'm like a maxi and only attached to this ecosystem, but I never fully sort of understood how that would be like an Avalanche specific mission. It seems to me like it would just be an LLM on top of a blockchain, which is not something that like a blockchain foundation should be developing. Do you have a take on that, Bill? Like maybe I misunderstood how this worked.
Yeah, I mean, look, the folks who founded Avalabs, like they're brilliant computer scientists. They're the world's best blockchain experts by far. And I'm sure that, like in terms of the people who work in AI, like AI and blockchain, like they could probably stand toe to toe with any of those people. I would definitely put my backing behind them 2000%. But you have a fair point, like their expertise is in distributed systems, not in AI. Maybe like the intersection of LLMs and blockchain is something that they're kind of well suited for. I mean, Avalanche is supposed to be, it's VM agnostic. You can put whatever VM you want on top of the consensus algorithm. So yeah. I think it does make more sense in a place like Avalanche than in, an EVM focused chain or, whatever. It's like supposed to be able to support many different types of VMs. So if you had to choose a blockchain to marry it with, Avalanche makes sense.
I think it's a fair avenue for them to want to pursue, especially like you said, if they want to encourage people to actually get into it, well, be the ones to start off some experiments, maybe get like a really janky working model that like sends your tokens to the wrong person. Some people will be super critical of it, but then, I mean, the way this industry works, people will come in and fix it and they'll make money off doing it.
Yeah, I could absolutely see that happening. Yeah.
So a couple of thoughts on this. So I do think, you kind of highlighted, I think, a few other good possibilities of AI. So one, I think, would be like an AI-driven NEV bot. Similar to that would be like a solver. So DEX aggregators use solvers to fulfill swap requests. And I think with moving to like an intent-based architecture, cross-chain, et cetera, solvers will become more important and you could have AI-based solvers. I think that's pretty important. I think just blockchain devs are just going to get better because these tools help you write code better, faster, higher quality. Same story with auditors. You'll have more AI auditing tools or AI helping auditors get better at their job. I think there's some pretty interesting things there. So that all, maybe we just see a big decline in exploits happening because people are writing better code and auditing it better with LLMs. Back when I worked in this space, I used to consult this website a lot called Papers with Code, where someone trains some new transformer and, it outperforms the latest, outperforms the other models on, certain data sets, et cetera. And then they would just kind of write a paper about it, release the code. And then if you wanted to, you could go grab their model and do things with it, et cetera. But there's no way to really monetize that. What I think would be interesting is if there was an L1 or an L2 where you could have an interesting way where, say, I train some LLM and I can somehow hook it into the chain. And if someone's app plugs into, uses mine, et cetera, then maybe I get a share of the gas fees or something. So it'd be a way for people training models to kind of monetize that activity. I think there could be something interesting there. Or I build an app that plugs into GPT or something. And then as far as experts to follow in the space, one other person to just call out, the founder of Near is one of the authors on probably the most important AI paper in the last 20 years, maybe ever. The paper's called Attention is All You Need. And he was doing that stuff before he moved into the blockchain space. He's talked a lot about the intersection of AI and blockchain. He's a person who I think it's worth following and seeing kind of what he says is worth pursuing and et cetera.
This guy, his name's Ilya, right? I've seen him talking. He seems really smart.
Yeah, he's a legit genius, and his contributions to AI are like some of the most important in the world. And then he built a really performant execution chart of blockchain. So he's kind of worked in both in a really high level way in both cases. And so I just think his opinions are really worth following.
Cool. Good tip. Okay, guys, if it's all right, I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you in person next week and hopefully getting that pod together while we're there. And for the listeners that we have, we'll have some nice updates from Argentina next week and the week after to tell you all what the buzz is on Avalanche. So everyone have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys next week in Argentina.